Our second dialogue, appropriately, is on opening up the ballot and fair representation elections with Krist Novoselic and Michael Lind. Krist was a member of the groundbreaking band Nirvana. Have a seat, Krist. And in 2004, he wrote of grunge and government, Let's Fix This Broken Democracy, leading to appearances on network TV and the New Yorker Profile. He joined our board in 2005 and has been our chair since 2008. Michael's co-founder of the New America Foundation, where he co-authored its manifesto, The Radical Center, which is one among a stream of his books and high-profile writings. He co-founded the American Strategy Program and today is policy director of New America's Economic Growth Program. Gentlemen.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everybody. It's nice to see everybody here today. And I've been into election reform since the late 1990s, and it's been quite a journey to learn about the opportunities and potential for democracy in the United States. And so I'm going to open up our dialogue here with a question for Michael Lind, because he wrote a really great article in 1992 for The Atlantic about proportional representation for the United States. So if you follow me on Twitter at Krist Novoselic, you'll see that I tweeted a link to the article last night. So check it out. So Michael, so if you can just kind of go over some of the points of your article you wrote.
Yeah, what was going on in 1992 was it was clear that we had a de facto 4 or 5 party system in this country that didn't fit into the confines of a 2-party system. At that point, there were Reagan Democrats, there were lots of moderate Rockefeller Republicans, there were these centrists around Ross Perot who got a bigger share of the vote than any third-party presidential candidate in 1992 since Theodore Roosevelt. And so I just was interested in this. Why is it that our system discriminates against third parties? Because it seemed to me it was artificially preventing what would be a natural multi-party system in the U.S. And the more I looked at it, the more I decided, and I still think this is the case, that when American politics has worked, we've had a de facto multi-party system under a nominal 2-party system because of our inherited British first-past-the-post system. So, for example, if you look at the Civil Rights Revolution, lots of conservative segregationist Democrats opposed it. Lots of enlightened Northern liberal Republicans supported it. So you had these shifting coalitions. And what has happened since I wrote that article in 1992 is you've had a move towards much more party discipline in both parties. And I think what that has done is, A, it's created polarization. B, it's made cross-party coalitions all but extinct. And C, it's just created a large alienated plurality or majority of Americans who, you know, they may be for Keystone but against labor unions, or they may be pro-labor or against Keystone or something, and they don't have even a faction in one of the 2 parties that represents them. But I'm going to turn the tables. How did you get interested in this subject?
Well, I was in the early 90s when Seattle music was taking the world by storm. There was a Seattle City Council that was anti-music with their teen dance.
It's hard to believe.
What's that? Yeah, it's hard to believe. A teen dance ordinance. Washington State Legislature was anti-music with their erotic music law. And so here was, you go anywhere in the world and people equate Washington State and Seattle with great music, the Space Needle, Mount Rainier, but in our own city council and legislature, we were getting no respect. And so part of my civic education was working with the groups of musicians, music promotions, and fans to be proactive about our music community. And I learned about how to put a bill through the legislature, how to work relationships with people. We were proactive. Our music community is an asset and not a liability. And then people were really enthusiastic to get involved. We had a goal. People would want to contribute time, resources, throw on concerts. But when it came to voting, people were really cynical. Mm-hmm. And so I looked into it, and I was on Alta Vista search engine at the time. And this
we're both showing our age.
Yeah. Pre-Yahoo. Am I missing somebody? Google it. Anyway, and there was one group in the United States that was active in this election reform with like ranked choice voting and proportional representation. Fair Vote, the Center for Voting and Democracy. And I reached out and I started to work with Rob, Steve Hill, and their chair was this really cool dude, the indie politician, independent, John B. Anderson. And he helped found Fair Vote in 1992. Michael was part of that.
Yeah, they reached out after I published my article. I thought I was a lone lunatic, and it turned out I was actually part of a cult. And since then, the way movements grow, I think it's now bigger than a cult, it's a sect.
I'm the guru. No, actually we're decentralized now.
But the next stage beyond a sect is a respected denomination. So, and I think Rob and the rest of the team at what is now called Fair Vote, it's remarkable what has been achieved in this fairly short period of time, I think.
Yeah, we're becoming established, so we have our centers of action around the, it's not like an ashram, it's more like a reading room or something. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go. I'm trying to be entertaining. You know, and so Fair Vote's made a lot of progress over the years on the municipal level. Won some great battles, lost a few, but you know that's when you learn along the way. But that's part of bringing meaningful change and giving voters more choices. We go up against the political establishment, and so there's pushback. But then it was just like with the music community, where we were getting pushback, but we made this message and saying, hey, this is more inclusive, it's creating opportunities. And so then we started to get lawmakers who recognized that, and they got on board. And we're seeing that with like ranked choice voting in like Oakland and in Minneapolis, where there's like establishment lawmakers who see the value in it and see the positive outcome in it. And so that's where we're gaining traction. And it's a really exciting time now for our reforms, especially since 1992. Lots happened.
Yeah, and I think you can also see sort of a path forward that is, how do you get there from here, which is there being ultimately the federal government. Most of the successes so far have been at the local level. I think it takes time, everything takes time, but if you get a generation of politicians who start off at the city level, city or county, go on to the state legislature and then to Congress, which is what is the normal career path for members of the House and the Senate, then I think what will seem outlandish to the older generation will seem perfectly normal and desirable to people who went through this local government. At least that's my optimistic take on it.
Yeah, you know, and all politics are local. And I wish more people were involved in local politics because you could make a real change. But you know, there's been a lot of opportunities there for our kinds of election reform.
Yeah, I think one of the problems, on the other hand, a more pessimistic view is the local and state elections. The stakes tend to be lower, partly because the federal government has nationalized a lot of things that used to be state and local issues, rightly so in the case of civil rights and censorship and things like that. But what that means is the real hot button issues tend to be federal, whereas the stakes are just lower. In the city or county elections, it's municipal bonds or parks or school initiatives or something like that. And so I think there's more riding on any change at the federal level than there is in the change of rules at the local and the state level. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I was also wondering what attributed to that local disconnection. Like I'll go talk to entertainment people who are political, or they do some kind of political entertainment show on the internet or on television, and I'll ask them who is your state representative or who's your representative in Congress, and they'll go, I don't know. And so that part, your point is really good about that's where all the action is, seems to be nationally because it's been federalized. But also, I think that might be a failure of geographic districting because they just put us in these single-member districts, and you kind of get who you get. It's uncompetitive, it's uncontested. That takes me back to when I was working for music issues. It's like, she's terrible on our issues. We need to vote her out. And then people would laugh at me because I was so naive. Oh, she's in a safe seat district. And I'm like, what's a safe seat district? It's just well, it was made for her. Who made this district? This committee did. A committee made a district for the voters? Yeah, they actually choose who. Things wow. It was the veil was lifted. I go, how do the voters
how do voters have the power? And so you get like ranked choice voting, which is sophisticated. There's these like vote transfers, okay? And you got to explain that to people, and sometimes you get that 1,000-yard stare, like how does that work? But I think you can explain it in a way like it's a runoff. It's like similar to a runoff. And so basically the point is like instead of some committee having the power to decide who represents them, and they have all this sophistication, they're demographers, cartographers, they have the data, and they cook these districts. The voters to have that sophistication on the ballot, that's where the power is. And so that's our message at Fair Vote. It's up to voters to decide.
Well, in our system, the politicians choose the voters. The voters don't choose the politicians. Yeah, so the alternatives, there are all kinds of elaborate mathematical alternatives, but pretty much ranked choice voting for single-member offices. Ideally, at least in one branch of a bicameral legislature, you would have multi-member districts. In Europe, they use party list. Here, because of the anti-partisan tradition, maybe you could use ranked choice voting. And Fair Vote has drawn up very interesting maps for different states, showing what it would look like. And the great advantage of that is, if you're in a single-member district, then let's say if it's a Republican majority district and it's completely safe, then your representative doesn't really care if you're a Republican because you're just going to get reelected anyway. If you're a Democrat, forget it. You have nobody to go to necessarily. If you have a multi-member district that actually represents the real divisions in a very rough way within this 3-member area, then you can find somebody who is closer to your own concerns, but who's also local, right? Who's representing you, right? Even if the other two you don't like as much. So that's why I think we want to keep fighting for multi-member districts as part of the solution, and in addition to things like ranked choice voting and single-member districts.
Right. We have a tradition of proportional representation in the United States, and so I started advocating fair representation voting, proportional representation, and I can't believe how many times, is that a parliamentary system, Krist? I'm like, no. I'm not saying we should have a unicameral legislature that elects this like governor or prime minister or whatever. I'm not saying that. Well, what about all this like, it takes 1% of the vote to get elected? It's like, no, it's not some Euro party list system where it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the vote to get elected. And there's American versions of this that are candidate-based. They're not party-based. Kathleen Barber, the late Kathleen Barber, has this great book, Proportional Representation in Ohio, about their experience with it a generation ago. And she says there's no tradition of party-list ballots in English-speaking countries. So you go to Australia, Ireland, Canada, United States, we go for the ranking system because it's candidate-based, and that's part of our values is to support candidates. However, at the same time, it'll accommodate parties. And then there's a threshold. It takes... Israel just raised its threshold now in this upcoming election, 3.5% they're going for or something. They want to put a little bit of brakes on their democracy. Maybe it's a little too loose. So they're raising the threshold, but we're saying we'd like to see thresholds of like 20%, 25%, maybe even 33%. It's a very conservative version of proportional representation, the American version.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it may very well be that this American version would spread to Europe, the original home of proportional representation, as the parties decay in those societies, as they tend to do in all of these post-industrial nations. The parties increasingly, even in Britain and in France and Germany, are detached from actual social organizations and are turning into what they're turning into in the U.S., which is very candidate-centered things. And rather than bewail this phenomenon, you might as well ask, well, how can you use this candidate-centered politics in a way that's more democratic?
Right. In Fair Vote, we're advocating these reforms that there's tons of scholarship about it. There's a jurisprudence. It's just like, we're not making this up, folks. I mean, there's a tradition of it in the United States. There's ranked choice voting. There's like the single one-vote method. And there's cumulative voting. So there's basically 3 of these reforms, though we prefer the ranking because we feel it's better for the
So that's the case for our cult, which has grown into a sect and aspires to be a denomination.
We're going to do a breathing exercise now.
Thank you, Krist and Mike. Give you a hand of applause.
Thank you.